if you can believe this, so we've had a new prime minister. She comes into office, decides that the obesity crisis is not, it's not a crisis at all, and she's going to delay having talks about what to do about it until 2025. So she stopped it all. And then, as quickly as that happened, it came out in the media that she is married. Her husband is the director of British Sugar.
Mike, how did you find carnivore?
So yeah, interesting story, Dave. I'll give you the background, what led up to it, because then the full context will make sense. So I'll keep it short though. So for me, leading up to 2020, not living the best life, to put it straight. So had a really successful business, don't get me wrong, but obviously what comes with that, lots of stress, responsibility and stuff. In that time, lost my brother to suicide, lost my mum to cancer, had some kids, and didn't really give myself time to process all of that. So anyway, eating like crap, not living the best life, hadn't trained in 10 years. So I was pretty obese and stuff, and so not in a good place. Anyway, 2020 comes, I live in the UK government locks everybody down. And for me, the business I was running at the time was serving gym-based personal trainers. So of course, with the prolonged lockdowns, that kind of put most of those out of business and stuff. And so it was around that kind of time, though, that gave me some space to kind of, just realize like, oh wow, like I've really screwed this up, like really bad. And obviously, being a dietitian, not a good look, really. And so yeah, just obviously decided I needed to do something, but to be honest, wasn't really sure what to do because at the time it just felt really overwhelming. So like I said, I was morbidly obese at the time, had IBS, acid reflux, bloated all the time. That was crazy. I was, at that point drinking almost every day just to get through the day. I was on SSRIs for my mental health. At that point diagnosed with a few different psychiatric disorders. So obviously felt clinically just really overwhelming, like, well, how do I decide what to do? And so what I did in the end was I just thought, well, I'll do what I do best, which is just sit down, read a bunch of studies, mind map everything and try to formulate some kind of plan that makes some kind of sense. So I know that, like, I needed to lose weight. So I know, right, almost any diet can work for that. So, okay, check that box. On the gut health stuff, everybody's heard of the low FODMAP diet. I decided that was way too complicated for me. I'm a simple person. I need simple instructions. So I knew, though, that if we reduce fiber and we reduce starches, that reduces anything fermentable in the gut. So we get less fermentation, less acid reflux, bloating, all of that stuff that I was dealing with. So I was like, okay, cool, I could do that. And then on the mental health side, to be honest, I didn't really know what to do. But I'd read 2 studies that kind of helped me make up my mind. So there's one by Eric Westman and a few other co-authors did this uncontrolled study, and I think they took something like 30 people that all had like bipolar and various psychiatric disorders, put them on a ketogenic diet, and at least half of them came off their medications because they were fine. So that was really interesting. So I was like, oh, cool. And then there was at the same time as a similar study from University of Reading that had come out where they'd given people high dose vitamin B6, and that had reduced people's depression, anxiety, etc. And the theory for why these 2 different things were working was the same, because the ketogenic diet, in theory, Eric Westman was saying that it increases brain GABA. And then the B6 stuff was, University of Reading was theorizing the same thing. The B6 was increasing brain GABA, and that was having all the beneficial effects. So that was it for me. I thought, right, if I do low carb, I know I can lose weight. Maybe my mental health will get better. My IBS will go away. I wasn't sure about the mental health one, but I knew for sure my IBS will go away, I'll lose weight. So that's what I did, and that's where I started. And I started in the beginning and this was 2020, by the way. So I started just low carb, not counting calories, not worrying about anything. Still eating a few vegetables at that time. Of course, fast forward 8 months, lost a ton of weight. I was, exercising in the gym. Fortunately, a very good friend of mine has a gym, so I was able to train during lockdown. So I was training, just eating low carb, not worrying about anything. And, in that time, kind of, I saw my mental health get better. In that 8 months, I came off the SSRIs, like I said, lost a ton of weight, IBS almost gone. And then what happened, and this is where it transitions into carnivore, and it kind of happened almost by mistake. Because I'd heard of carnivore at that point. I just never looked into it because I just thought, this is just the next line of crazy faddiness. But what I found myself doing in that 8 months was just, as I was optimizing for my gut health and how I felt, right? I just found myself eating less and less vegetables and fruits until eventually, I think I got to a point where after about 3 months, I was like, wow, all I've eaten is meat. And I've always been a big meat eater. I've always loved it. And I think that's why it just happened that way. Like I said, optimizing for my gut health, for how I felt, energy, and of course, enjoyment, right? Like you're not going to stick to a plan that you don't enjoy. So all of those things combined, and I was like, I'm pretty much doing this carnivore diet thing. I should probably look into it. And so that's then what started after that first year of, doing low carb, keto, whatever you want to call that. That's when I started looking into at the end of that first year. Okay, well, what is this carnivore diet thing? Because I'm doing it. I just don't know what it's supposed to be or what people are saying about it. And of course, then come across Dr. Sean Baker, Dr. Anthony Chafee, and people like Bart K and all these people, and start listening to these guys. And at first, as a dietitian, I've been to dietitian school. I've been taught certain things in a certain way. And don't get me wrong, I've never been the kind of dietitian that's bought into all of that. I come from a sports science background, so even in dietitian school, I was mostly skeptical. But even still, like listening to these proponents of the carnivore diet, at first I was like, this just sounds a bit bonkers. So my first concern as a dietitian was like, well, where's my vitamin C coming from? I think that's the first concern for anybody. And that was the first thing I dove into. Start listening to lots of interviews and stuff of people talking about it. Start digging up the studies myself. That's one thing I always do. If somebody says something on a YouTube channel and I'm like, oh, that's odd or interesting, I'll go and find the studies to make sure what they're saying is at least somewhat correct. And that vitamin C thing, that really opened my eyes because, I found the studies and, as you probably know by now, many people have mentioned it, but the GLUT receptors that move the glucose into the cells, those are the same ones that move the vitamin C into the cells. You get less glucose in your bloodstream, so there's less competition for the receptors. So you absorb more vitamin C, and therefore your requirements do go down. And because the animals are supplemented and stuff, there is vitamin C in the meat. And so I was reading all that, and I was like, wow, this is crazy because I'd never got taught that in dietitian school. I've done an undergrad, I've done a master's level degree. Never that was never mentioned ever. All you get taught is, well, you need to eat more fruit and vegetables as much as possible to get more vitamin C. But once I'd learned that, it kind of made sense then. When you're looking at all these carnivore people, and it's like, well, Sean Baker's been carnivore for like 7-8 years. He doesn't have scurvy, and this is what I say to a lot of the detractors, like then and still now. So, a lot of people will say things like, oh, but the carnivore diet's stupid and you're going to have all these issues. And for me, just scientifically speaking, I don't see how people can't not be curious about, well, you got all these thousands of people doing this thing. They're not dying of scurvy. They're not dying of, carbohydrate malnutrition, or all of these things, or lack of fiber, and so they're not having these issues. So scientifically, I don't get how scientists aren't curious, like even just to go and study it. So anyway, so that's kind of what got me onto carnivore, and ever since then, it's just been, still doing it now, kind of doing Ken Berry's BBBE thing since just pre-Christmas. Didn't think I had that much weight to lose still, but I've lost a bunch. and here I am. So now I'm like mostly eating carnivore most of the time. When people ask me like what I do diet wise, some variation of carnivore, ketogenic, or low carb, and that's depending on what I'm optimizing for. So at the moment it's just getting as lean as possible. Whereas obviously there are certain times in the year where I'm more optimizing for mental health and I'll be chasing ketones. And then there are times where I'm looking to put on muscle and then I'm more eating like low carb. I'm including dairy and yogurt and these kinds of things. So it's always changing. But yeah, like the base of my diet, 90%. I mean now 100% at the moment is meat, and yeah, like it works. Go.
So I'm interested. Like you're doing strict BBBE for this month.
I started literally a week before Christmas, which I know is an
Oh,
odd
okay.
time of year to start a diet. But that's when I started. Yeah, so I'm about 11% down in terms of fat loss. My all my lifts in the
Oh,
gym
wow.
are all my lifts in the gym are exactly as they were. So I've not
Hmm.
lost any strength yet. Yeah, so it's going good.
That's awesome. And in basically 5 weeks.
Is it five? Yeah, I've lost track to be honest. Yeah, just
Yeah,
before Christmas. So we're end
that's
of
awesome.
January now. That's four. Yeah, about 5 weeks ish, maybe six.
Wow.
Um,
So um, I just want to kind of jump back to something you said
hmm,
about you can't understand why scientists aren't curious.
hmm,
And I think that's one of the things that gets me the most as well is when you talk about this kind of thing. And ordinarily, in any other part of life, people that are kind of very interested in that area would be like, really, that's an interesting phenomenon. I want to find out more about that. But
hmm.
in when it comes to nutrition, the response seems to be more about whataboutism.
Yeah.
It's like, oh yeah, but what about? And it's like, hang on, but aren't you at least interested in the fact this is working the same way for so many people? But
Hmm.
it's always, what about this? What about this? What about this?
Yeah. Yeah. I completely agree. I mean, for somebody in that space, like for a long time, I think just nutrition's become so politicized. It's worse now than ever. We've got the vegan tribe trying to prove their diet is optimal. We've got, there are low carb researchers that are trying to prove that side of the coin, and then you've got the low fat people that are trying to prove like ultra low fat and dietary guidelines. So everybody's, and the funny thing is like the people that attack me on Twitter, accusing me of like, oh, you're in a diet tribe, you're in a cult. They're doing exactly the same thing because those are the people. And oddly enough, these two tend to be healthcare professionals. They'll say to me, Mike, you're in a diet tribe, you're in a cult, you shouldn't be promoting low carb. But then they'll go, oh, but you can do any diet you want except that one. And I'm like, I'm doing this because this is what works for me. I've solved all these medical issues personally for me. I see patients get better doing this. Like at this point, low carb is not controversial at all. We've had decades of research. It's been around forever. So for me, I just don't understand it. But yeah, I think it's like you're saying, it's just become so politicized, and it's like the vegan movement, right? It's not really, nobody becomes a vegan for their health. They start by feeling bad for the animals, right? And that's where it starts. And then it becomes like a moral thing for them. And then they set out, of course, to prove that it is the healthiest diet in the world. But their starting point has to do with morals and ethics and all of that kind of stuff. And that's the state of nutrition, sadly, as opposed to like objective curiosity. Like, well, and that's, man, not that I'm a scientist, I'm a dietitian. I work every day with patients. I do obviously read science and try to interpret it and make it practical. But I just don't understand why more scientists aren't. Like, I watched a video a few months ago. I think it was, I can't remember the YouTube channel. It's like one of these big channels interviewing this epidemiologist, and the interviewer had asked him, "Well, what do you think about this carnivore diet thing?" And the scientist just went, "It's completely stupid. It doesn't make sense. It does not work. It's just a stupid idea." And I was listening to him thinking, "You're a scientist." So on the one hand, I get that you're saying, well, there's no randomized control trial of a carnivore diet, so it's not evidence based. So we can't say I get that. However, it's never been studied, so you equally don't know. Your answer should have been, I don't know. The anecdotes are really interesting, so maybe we should study it to see if there is anything. Because the reality is, and we can go in there, and this is how I feel as a clinician, is when you look at the state of the world, right? So where I live in England, the primary care statistics are awful. It'll be the same in America. Any westernized country will be the same. Obesity, never been higher. Diabetes, never been higher. Hypertension, never been higher. Cancer, never been higher. Across the board, like nothing, like it's just what we're doing is not working. So we need more tools in the toolbox, right? Is the way I think about it. I could very easily right now go, oh, what we're doing isn't working. Let's scrap everything and start again. I don't think that's the right approach either, like all or nothing type thinking. But we do need more tools in the toolbox, definitely. The pharma industry will argue that we need more drugs. Cool, like that's their business model. I get it, and in some respects, they're right? Because some people aren't going to change their lifestyle, but we still need to figure out how to help them. That's fine. That makes sense. But we also need more nutritional tools in the toolbox. And this is what winds me up at the moment about, let's say, orthodox healthcare nutrition advice, right? So, specifically in the NHS, the same has happened in America, in Australia, all the westernized countries have the same food pyramid type thing. And whilst on the one hand, they say that there is no magic diet that can fix all medical issues, and there's no one magic diet that everybody should follow. That's what they say, and that's what I got taught in dietitian school. And on the same token, and in the very next sentence, they will then say everybody needs to eat our food pyramid. And I checked recently on the NHS website. At the moment, it actually says everybody should follow the Eat Well guide, which is their pyramid thing. Everybody should follow their Eat Well guide, regardless of ethnicity, regardless of cultural background, regardless of clinical condition. That's what they should eat. And I'm like, the level of hypocrisy is outstanding. Like, it's literally off the charts. Do you know what I mean? And then you overlap that with like, okay, like it's not working. We don't have enough tools to help people. And I mentioned all of this in I give a presentation recently down in London at an obesity conference. And this was the angle I was coming at from it in terms of like, as clinicians, we are told we need to be what they call patient centered. What that means is we are supposed to listen to our patients. We are supposed to sort of guide them, but ultimately listen to them, respect their preferences and all of that. And just basically, acknowledge that everybody's different. Everybody can achieve similar goals in different ways. But yeah, we're forcing everybody onto this food pyramid type thing whilst telling them, no, don't you dare do low carb or don't you dare try that carnivore thing. And yeah, like I don't know. It's just I have no words.
We shouldn't force them into doing anything. Everyone's different, but make sure you're mainly eating cornflakes and bread and don't touch the eggs.
Exactly. Exactly. Which is bananas.
I think I saw you post on Twitter or X about that conference, and I think you said something like they asked you to do a presentation but no debate or something like that. Is that the one you're talking about?
Yeah, that's the one. Yeah. So the situation was, so somebody else was invited to the conference, and that somebody else is, is a professor, of course, but couldn't make it. So last minute, he rings me up and he's like, "Oh, do you want to step in and do it?" And I was like, "Yeah, absolutely. I'm always up for that kind of thing. Like any chance to get the message out and talk to people, and so I'm always up for it." I did ask him. I was like, "Is there anything you don't want me to say?" Because I can be very sort of outlandish and say I'll be very outspoken. And he's like, "No, that's fine. I trust you. Just go and deliver a good talk." So I was like, "Great." So I put my presentation together. It's like, right, this is what I want to say. I think this is what's important. And then when I get there on the day, I arrive sort of like a couple of hours late, but on time for my segment. And I'm listening to them talk, and I realize, oh, this is a debate. So the debate was between these two professors of, shall we, is pharmaceuticals the way to deal with the obesity crisis or lifestyle? And they were both presenting the pros and cons of each side. And I'm sat there listening to them about 30 minutes away from delivering my segment, thinking, oh shit, like nobody said it was a debate. So as I was saying, I didn't realize the whole thing was like this crazy debate between the farmer guy and the lifestyle guy, and of course the farmer industry guy was, his viewpoint was basically lifestyle change does not work, so we need to lean on more drugs. and the lifestyle guy was, obviously the opposite of that. And it was interesting because they both had good points to make. But it does reflect a little bit the sort of nutrition politicization type stuff because, yeah, like that's kind of what they were doing. They're very black and white. It's either drugs or lifestyle. And when I presented, I was like, look, we need all the tools in the toolbox. And I even had an image of a toolbox because that's the way I like to think about it as a clinician. As somebody that's just living his life trying to get better. As somebody I literally get paid to help people. So if a patient of mine tells me, and sometimes they do, like if they say they want to do a vegan diet because they think it's gonna improve their health, XYZ, I will support them in that. That's my job. And for me, the more, like I said, the more tools we have in the toolbox to help people, the better. And that was kind of the whole point of my presentation. So I had slides showing that indigenous people, when they moved into industrialized diets, they all developed obesity, heart disease, diabetes. That's very well documented. And that's true for so you had like the Inuits and the Maasai and the Tokelauans that had very high fat, low carb diets, no heart disease, no nothing. And then I forget the name of the other tribe, but they were more, I think they're from Australia. I can't remember their name. Maybe somebody who's listening can check and post in the comments. But their indigenous diet was like very low fat, lots of tubers and fruits and these kinds of things. But again, no heart disease, no obesity, none of the modern diseases. All of those only happened when they transitioned to post-industrial diets. And that was one of my slides. And I was like, I think we know what we need to do here. It's just that like we're actually just not doing it. And we're like really, really not. So at the moment in the UK, if you can believe this, so we've had a new prime minister. She comes into office, decides that the obesity crisis it's not a crisis at all, and she's going to delay having talks about what to do about it until 2025. So she stopped it all. And then as quickly as that happened, it came out in the media that she is married. Her husband is the director of British Sugar. Can you believe it? So, like this is the level of sort of politicization and nonsense that you have to deal with.
So, was she the short-lived prime minister, the one that was just there for a little while? And
Not her, no. So we've got another woman in office at the moment. She's currently in office. The one you're thinking of, I can't remember her name. I'm rubbish with names, but yeah, she got in and then literally got booted out 8 weeks later or something. But yeah, so we've got another one. So Rishi Sunak is gone, and then I forget this lady's name, but yeah, she's come in and she's like, "Nah, obesity thing, we don't need to talk about that. Park that till 2025." And when I saw that, I was like, "Wow! Like what kind of message does that send to the country, to the people, to clinicians? To It's like, oh yeah, no, that's not important. Don't need to talk about that." It's just
oh,
bonkers.
that's awful.
It's just bonkers. Yeah, try to.
So, just before we move on, I just got to say, I really do like that idea from your presentation about the toolbox. We need to have all the things available to try and help people, right?
Of
Because
course, of
it's
course.
like anyone that says that's not a good idea is also someone who would probably think it's a good idea for an ambulance to be driving around with only crutches in the back of it. It's like, what's wrong with it? It's got a blood nose. Get one of the crutches.
Yeah.
It's like, well,
Exactly. Yeah, yeah. And yeah, like I mean, I, yeah, I just don't understand it. I've always thought that. Like I've been involved in the fitness industry for a long time. Like when I was in my 20s, so I'm literally just about to turn 40. But in my 20s, I had a popular podcast, and I've kind of always approached it that way, just because it makes sense, right? Like different people will stick to different diets for varying reasons, right? Like we've talked about the vegans, and then some people will stick to a carnivore, low carb type diet because they love to eat meat and they like how that tastes. And I'm convinced that like if you don't enjoy something, this is going to sound so obvious, but it's amazing that we've missed it for so long. If you don't enjoy something, you will not stick to it. Now, I know that sounds drop dead obvious, and everybody listening is going to go, yeah, Mike, of course, you're not a genius, mate. However, it's taken behavior change researchers literally 30 or 40 years of behavior change research to figure that out. We've tried bribing people, giving them free Fitbits and all of that kind of stuff, make the food expensive, and all of that stuff kind of works, but none of it sticks. what sticks is if you get people doing stuff they enjoy because they naturally just want to do it. And that applies to exercise and that applies to food. So there's a lady, Dr. Michelle Segar, in my opinion, one of the leading behavior change researchers on the planet. All of her research shows what I've just said, and she's got a couple of really, really good books that people should check out. Definitely the clinicians, because it is really helpful when you're obviously helping people to rediscover their motivation, like why do they want to do stuff, and yeah, if you get people to a place where they enjoy the exercise they do, they enjoy the food that they're eating, then it doesn't feel like a diet, it doesn't feel like a restriction. And like I know you've obviously been doing carnivore for a little while now, and you obviously enjoy it. How do I know? Because you're still doing it, and you probably
Mm,
can't see yourself not doing it. Why? Because you just same for me, right? It's like, well, I'm kind of doing this BBBE thing at the moment just to get as lean as possible. But then once I'm done with the getting as lean as possible bit, what am I going to do? Probably eat more or less the same foods, just a little bit more. Why is that? Because I just love what I'm eating. It's not like, oh my god, how do I choke down this salad or this tofu, or which is how I would feel if I did that kind of thing.
right.
Just because I don't like those foods.
That's
But for the people that
the
do, more power to them.
yeah, the prospect of having to do that, like the tofu and the you got the prospect of tofu for dinner and then a salad for lunch and something minuscule for breakfast. If the doctor said you need to do this because of your health, there is no choice. It would be like the thoughts you would be having is just like, I'm not going to be able to stick to this. Like
Yeah,
you would be thinking straight away, I can't do it, right?
yeah,
And
absolutely.
yeah, you're 100% right. Carnivore for me, it's nearly 20 months, and it's so easy. I don't even have to think about anything.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. Absolutely the same. And,
Mm,
and again, we see that in research. Like we already know this. So in people that live with celiac disease, for example, a bit less so now because there are so many products on the market. But definitely 10 years ago, you get celiac disease, and it's like, right, all the foods you've been living on and that you enjoy, you have to give them up now. And what we see in those populations is depression goes up, anxiety goes up. They start almost like losing some of the hope to live because they're like, well, if I can't even eat the food that I enjoy, what's the kind of the point? And all this is, very well documented. Same in other conditions, people that get diagnosed with diabetes, and if up to that point they've been living a very grain heavy lifestyle, living on bread and all of this kind of stuff, it's easy for them to feel really depressed and anxious, and exactly what you've just said. And it's interesting though that when we come then to sort of dealing with obesity and nutrition, that we forget all of that, and everybody kind of falls into their tribal sort of ways. um, Even like I said before, even the people that say that they're not tribal about it, they are, because they're like, well, you can do any diet you want, just don't do that low carb one, and definitely don't do that carnivore one. And like I said, I do understand a bit the hesitance with carnivore from a clinician standpoint, because there really are no studies on it. So I understand the hesitation. However, what is interesting is when I've looked back at, so in my profession, we have something called the Manual of Dietetic Practice, and this is kind of like the Bible of what dietitians operate from. So those have been published, like, I mean, the first one I found, and I don't think it was the first one that was published. It's just the one I could find, was in 1911, and I've posted about this on Twitter, on X. So in 1911, in the Manual of Dietetic Practice, in there they talk about Dr. Salisbury and how he was using a carnivore diet to treat obesity, diabetes, and etc. They even mentioned some autoimmune conditions in there. Psoriasis was what they mentioned specifically. So that was documented in 1911, saying this is what some of these doctors are successfully using to treat things. Now, I know that's not evidence, but what that suggests to me is this carnivore thing has been around for a lot longer than people would like to admit. If it was, if we were all going to drop dead by doing it, of course, that would have been documented way before now. And somewhere along the line, like I said, the scientific curiosity has just dropped off a cliff, and everybody just seems intent on I think just intent on being right. We see this in science a lot. Everybody wants to be right. They want to have a big splash paper to get, all the citations and a bit of fame or whatever. I don't really feel like anybody's looking for answers at the minute. But maybe I'm
Yeah,
just cynical.
no, I think, well, I think that's the trouble, because when you talk honestly about this stuff, and when you say this doesn't make sense based on how people, as we discussed before, in other fields would look at these kind of things, these kind of disparities or these kind of successes, um, then because you start questioning these things and saying, well, it seems a bit weird, then people start to look at you like, oh yeah, it's you're just a conspiracy theorist or something like that. When it's like,
Yeah,
no, I'm
yeah,
just asking questions about this stuff.
yeah,
So why is asking a question now a conspiracy theorist thing now?
yeah,
You
yeah.
know?
It's amazing. I had this happen to me recently. So I had a academic message me privately, and I could tell he was trying to be fairly condescending. And that's kind of what he was saying to me in a very sort of polite way. And he was like, "Oh, so you're telling me you just don't eat any carbohydrates?" I was like, "Yeah, not at all. Like, definitely not for 3 years at least." And he's like, "Oh, and what?" So in my bio it says zero IBS, and he was like, "So what do you mean by zero IBS?" So I replied to him, and I was like, "Well, I don't have any symptoms. I don't take medication. Like, so as long as I keep doing what I'm doing, like, it's gone." Um, and then he was like, "Is you telling me don't eat any fiber?" I was like, "None, and I'm fine." And then he was like, "That." Do you know what I mean? And it's like he didn't say conspiracy, but the way he was messaging, I was like, he's just taking the mick. But do you know what I mean? It was just interesting though that it's like,
So,
and he's doing a study at the moment on IBS people. And again, just no real curiosity from that individual. I won't say who it is, but like no real curiosity about like, oh well, actually, let me think about why that could work. And I've thought about that, like, and it, like, there is a mechanism by which that completely makes sense. So for example, we know from Dr. Mark Pimentel, I believe. So he had a few studies out a few years ago, like 10, 12 years ago, showing that up to 80% of people with IBS may have small intestinal bacterial overgrowth. And then when you look in, well, what is that? Well, that's characterized by excessive fermentation of certain foods. Well, okay, what foods are those? Well, mostly fiber, um, and anything starchy. There are certain types of starches you can eat that sort of bypass all the fermentation because they're absorbed mostly in the small intestines. But for the most part, most starches are fermented in the large intestines. And so we get excess gas, fermentation, lots of pressure buildup, diarrhea, constipation, acid reflux. This can exacerbate rosacea and all of these kinds of conditions, and they're all kind of linked by what's going on in the gut. And so there is a mechanism there. But I mean, there's literally one doctor on the planet that's talking about that, though. Dr. Norm Robillard. Literally just one. And yeah, baffling,
no one else is
baffling.
interested because it doesn't play into the regular kind of thing. And
Exactly, yeah. And you just get labeled, like you said, a conspiracy theorist, or, like for the longest time, even at home, my wife would be like, you should eat some vegetables, and like even like friends for the longest time would be like, this, I don't think this is going to be sustainable. But then fast forward 3 years and everybody's copying me, you
well,
know.
so I want to I want to get on to talking about your practice a little bit, but just
Go
before
for
we
it.
do that,
Yeah.
talking about family and friends,
Mm.
how is everyone reacting, and is who's kind of gone, I'm going to give this a go too.
Yeah. So really interesting. So my wife in the beginning was the biggest detractor. She's a vegan, by the way, which is, for that first year was definitely an interesting one. In the end, we just agreed to not talk about it. Because of course, I mean, she's not trained in nutrition science or anything at all, so she would say things that she's seen on the media and all of that, and then I would just come back with, well, what about this? What about this? What about this? Like, what about this study? What about that study? And so she's fine with it now. So she sees like, oh, my husband's healthier than ever, happier than ever. So she's like, cool, let him do what he wants to do. So She's got no problems with me chowing down ribeyes every evening, fortunately. With my friends, obviously, my friends were a bit more open, really. But for the first while that I was doing it, everybody just kind of obviously wasn't sure about it and was almost just like watching to see what would happen, kind of thing. But
Is he
then
going to explode?
maybe that's what they thought, yeah. But then as it obviously panned out, again, same thing. See me leaner than ever, more muscular than ever, like stronger than ever, happier than ever. And then quite a few of my friends now actually and quite a few of their friends have gone on to try it. Either full blown carnivore or some variation of low carb, keto, and they're all getting on great. They all say that like they don't feel hungry, they lost a ton of weight, they feel energy levels, they feel amazing, and they all admit that in the beginning they were just really skeptical, and they're very very surprised by ultimately how they feel, how good they feel, and all of them are saying the same thing, which is they feel that good, they just can't imagine not doing it now. Um, yeah,
This is, I mean, that kind of thing's awesome to hear because that's how it really spreads, right? Because it's like your friends are having success, so of course they're going to go and tell people in their family or, other friends in different circles and whatever, and it just slowly, person by person, filters down, and more people kind of get get the idea and get started with it, right?
definitely, and it feeds into what we was talking about with the scientific curiosity thing, because if you've got something that helps people feel better, less bloated, more energetic, mentally clearer, etc., all of these things, at some point, somebody with some academic punch has to go, I think these lot are idiots, but let's do a study, right? Like, let's do a randomized control trial. Let's do this. Let's do that. I know Sean Baker's trying to push it, but that's what we need really to sort of start legitimizing it. Or, like I say to people, if we're being totally objective, if a study comes out and says, look, it's complete nonsense, it definitely doesn't work, and we've proven it, it's like, okay, cool. We're all just running around living off placebo effects then. I'm good with that. You know what I mean? Like I'm completely fine with that if that's the case. All I know is I feel great, I look good, I'm happy.
Yeah, yeah. So, in your practice, how are you working with your patients? Like when someone comes in, is it basically okay? Well, you're on low carb, you're on low carb, you're on low carb, or is there a more nuanced approach with everything?
There's definitely more nuanced approach, and yeah, for all the dietitians listening, because I do get a lot of hate from a lot of different dietitians on Twitter, on X, because of my stance. um, so they'll be happy to hear that there is, of course, lots of nuance. Like I said before, trying to work in a patient-centered way, trying to respect people's preferences. Often people come to me with ideas already of what they want to do, what they think would work, and that's fine. I will support them, and be as objective as I can. Where people want guidance or need guidance, then of course I will sort of guide them towards low carb. I don't necessarily use carnivore in clinical day to day practice, and really that's just because of the mismatch in the science between the science and real life thing. So as soon as we get a couple of randomized control trials or something that legitimizes it, then it becomes safe for people like me in work to go, oh, actually, this is a valid approach for this condition or for that condition. Whereas at the moment, there's nothing I can pin my hat on to be able to do that and be safe in the knowledge that I'm not going to get sacked, essentially. Because we're all, as clinicians, we're all burdened with this thing of like trying to operate in an evidence-based way, keeping patients safe, first do no harm, etc. And whilst me and you know, oh, the carnivore diet, there's definitely no harm there. It's like it works great. There's nothing objective, like that. That probably won't stand up in court if the British Dietetic Association decide to take me to court, which, touch wood, fingers crossed they don't. Um, so what I do mostly though is some variation of low carb, and that varies depending on the patient where they're starting from. So I'll give you an interesting story. Um, so just last year, a patient comes to me, a type 1 person living with type 1 diabetes. His HbA1c was 10%, which is incredibly high. Unfortunately, he was informed by his diabetes team that that was fine, that was normal. Of course, I had to notify him that that's not normal, and your cardiovascular disease risk is about 4 times greater at that level. So anyway, working with that individual, I did get him to reduce his carbohydrate intake because we know from lots of really strong evidence that your HbA1c is dictated by your amount of carbohydrates that you take in every day. And if it's still too high, just keep reducing it until it gets to where you want it to be. And that'll differ for different people depending on their lifestyle, activity levels, etc. So we know that for like that's like I said, really, really well established. So that's what I did with this individual. Now his starting point was he was literally eating, if you can believe this, a loaf of bread per day, like per day, and that was without the sugar in his tea and coffee, the fruit juices, the breakfast cereals, the crisps, the chocolate, a loaf of bread per day. And so, what I had him do, and we kind of not negotiated. That's probably not the right word, but we discussed it. Like how would you feel about cutting that down? And he was like, oh yeah, like I can do that. That's fine. So we got him down from a loaf of bread a day down to literally 1 or 2 slices a day. That's the only advice I gave him. His HbA1c went from 10% to 7, like literally just dropped. And so
Wow.
that's the kind of thing I will do with people on a day-to-day basis. And of course, with him now, obviously, we're now talking about, well, what's the next step, which will be, well, we'll just look at his diet overall. Where are these carbohydrates coming from? For him, it's likely going to be, well, can we swap that sugar in your coffee to something that doesn't have sugar in there, and that will be the next step. And just keep titrating it down to get his HbA1c down to a safer level, or as normalized as possible, would be ideal. So that's usually what I'm doing with people. And there are some clinical situations that I think necessitate a lower carb or reduced carbohydrate approach, like diabetes being one of them, PCOS being another one. So I don't know if people know much about PCOS, but 80% of those individuals, or those women, of course, they have hyperinsulinemia. And I've been a dietitian for 10 years. I've never seen a woman with PCOS do well on a low fat diet. They usually stick into it rigidly. They might lose a pound or something, but just really struggling to get the weight off. And it is because of that hyperinsulinemia, which is chronic, elevations in insulin. Like these people cannot eat any carbohydrates, and their pancreas is just outputting insulin. And of course, when they do eat carbohydrates, it's outputting a disproportionate amounts of insulin. And when you've got that much, it's obviously an excessive amount of insulin in your bloodstream, and we all know what insulin does. So for those ladies, we get them on not necessarily a ketogenic diet, but like a reduced carbohydrate diet. And then all of a sudden, they're able to lose weight. And then they go on, they feel better, their energy levels improve, all the benefits. And for some of them, their fertility comes back, which is amazing. So there are some clinical conditions like that I think necessitate low carb. And, I'll try to, where appropriate and where possible, I'll guide my patients in that direction. But like I said, ultimately, sometimes a patient will come in. So I had one lady comes to mind from last year, and because of her clinical situation, in my head, I thought, yeah, you need to be doing some variation of low carb. This is what will improve your situation. Clinically, like overweight, hypertensive, pre-diabetes. She had psoriasis, which is definitely linked with gut function. A few other sort of autoimmune type issues. And I was thinking, right, we need to get you on a lower carb diet, eating more meat. I think that's what's going to really, really help. But what she wanted to do was a vegan diet. And she come in wanting support with that. So I was like, look, this absolutely fine. And we had the whole discussion around, well, you need to supplement some nutrients and, all of these things, because of course my job is to keep patients safe. So she did that. And then 2 months later, she come back to me telling me that she was worse than ever. Symptoms worse than ever, had gained weight. And, her autoimmune issues were worse, psoriasis was worse, all of that. And it was one of those moments where, as an individual, if that was my friend, I would be like, bro, I told you. But obviously, as a clinician, I can't speak to patients like that. And I was like, oh, that's unfortunate. How about we try something completely different then? And that's what we did with her. And we got her on some variation of low carb, and got her lost some weight. Her psoriasis improved. All of her clinical issues improved. Haven't caught up with her for a while, but she had improved last time I spoke to her, and yeah, doing better than she was. So yeah.
The awesome thing about all these stories is that these are people coming to you with serious, serious health problems that they've probably been going to their doctor and getting kind of cover up meds for years, and nothing's really helped. And then they
Mm,
come and see you, you give them some advice, and just do this with your diet, and it's like things start improving basically straight away.
mm. Yeah,
It's
I mean, it
it's
is
awesome.
amazing. Yeah, it is amazing when you think about it, really. But I mean, is it really that surprising, right? So, like, what I tell everybody is that definitely in my line of work and definitely in society at large, mostly what people are struggling with, I think the majority are what we term lifestyle diseases, right? And so the clue is in the name, right? If you're struggling with a lifestyle disease, really your lifestyle is not working. So change it, and sometimes you can be that blunt with people and sometimes not, but fundamentally that's really all it means. And you can look up the definition of lifestyle disease. That's literally what it means. And I think people forget about that. Definitely, like in science at the moment, I feel like there's a push to find ever more complicated reasons for why things are happening, ever more complicated solutions. Everybody's looking for, like, how can we edit people's genetics to improve diabetes? How can we need to fix climate change so people can lose weight? And we're going, like, making everything so complicated and overlooking the real basic thing of, like, somebody's got a lifestyle disease. We know they acquired it through their current lifestyle. We should probably get them to change it. Like, it's not, I just don't think it's rocket science. I don't know.
Yeah, it's like so many things in life that, of course, some things are complicated. Like, it's hard to do well in your job and get promoted and all that stuff. It's hard to start a business. It's hard to do all these things. And I think what happens is the average person conflates those kind of things with stuff like nutrition. And
Maybe.
they think, well, of course, it can't just be as simple as changing the food I'm eating. It must be, I need to take lots of drugs. I need to do this. I need to take supplements. I need to take all these kind of things. And it's like, you don't. Just
Mhm.
fix what you, as you say, fix your lifestyle.
Yeah, yeah, and don't get me wrong. I feel like I should add in here that, like, there's nothing wrong with all the drugs and stuff, but, like, I feel like if people fix their lifestyle 80%, right, I feel like that will make a massive dent in a lot of the issues people are struggling with. And then if you still need some help for whatever reason, and of course there are clinical conditions that we have no idea what's going on, things like MS, for example. Nobody knows what the hell's going on with that. Does nutrition play a role? We don't know. And so in those cases, of course, we need those drugs. But yeah, like, if people just change their lifestyle, fix that will get them 80% of the way there for sure. I know because I've done it. You know because you've done it. Many people watching your channel have done it, and this is kind of my point at that obesity conference I was at, when the one of the professors was trying to make the point that lifestyle change doesn't work, and I was like, I did it. And if one person can do it, if there's only one person in the world can do it, that shows it's possible. And so my point after that was like, well, in the NHS, in the healthcare system, it'll be the same in America. The in-house sort of weight management programs and diabetes programs that we have, they're not working. Why are they not working? Well, because we're not doing the things that the academics tell us we should be doing to facilitate, proper behavior change. Like, they're just not getting done. And that was my point to him. Um, but yeah, so you are right though. Like, most people, you think people taking drugs for hypertension, it's like, you can fix it. But I do think, like, if you think, because I think about this a lot, right? Like, well, why do most people, like the average person in society, why is everybody so helpless, right? Like, oh, like, And it's, I'm not trying to make anybody feel bad or be negative or even be judgmental. That's not what I'm doing. I'm just trying to understand like why. And I do think, I don't know if you've heard of something called learned helplessness. Like this is actually a phenomenon. I think it was Richard Seligman or somebody, was it? Well, somebody like that. Anyway, so they've figured out like learned helplessness is a real psychological thing. And I think maybe that's what's going on in society. Everybody's so busy and stressed. Like you said, focus on their career, focus on trying to keep the kids alive. um, that they, when it comes to themselves, they're just like, just it is what it is. And I hear that from patients a lot. They get diagnosed with XYZ and they'll be like, it is what it is. I suppose there's nothing I can do. And I'm having to be the one to be like, whoa, 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 let's back up a minute.
Yeah. So, Mike, how can people get in touch with you? What's the best way to find you?
The best way is to catch me on Twitter, X. You've got my handle thing on the screen there. So yeah, get me on Twitter. I'm on there every day. Happy to answer questions. People do DM me with like clinical questions. More than happy to help people. Not on there to make money or anything. I'm only really on there because I'm sharing what I'm doing, and outside of that, just sharing stuff that I find interesting. A lot of it carnivore stuff, a lot of it low carb, keto stuff. So yeah, get on there, ask me questions. I would say send me a boost if you want, but I get enough of that already.
Cheers. Well, thank you so much for coming on and sharing your story with us, Mike. I really appreciate it.
Yeah, no stress. Thanks for having me on. It's been fun.